The next speaker, nalagay muna akong flashlight ko. The next speaker is the founding chairman of the Institute of Corporate Directors. He is recognized as the foremost authority on good governance. He has served in the private sector governance advisory boards of different presidents. In fact, he was the first outstanding Filipino awardee in the field of good governance. I am talking of the chairman of the Institute of Corporate Directors, none other than Dr. Jesus P. Estanislao.
The people behind Manila Center for Professional Development, ladies and gentlemen, maayong gabi kaninyong tanan. I was asked earlier by the Vice Governor whether I know how to speak Cebuano. I had to remind her that I was born in Cebu, I was raised in Cebu, I grew up in Cebu, and I graduated from Cebu. My biggest curse in life is that, unlike Archbishop Palma, I have not been returned to Cebu. I thought of giving you a very nice presentation on poverty, the roots of poverty, and the future direction that we must take. If this were a Manila crowd, I would give you a very colorful presentation with plenty of good pictures and rather cerebral, intellectual, and mental. But I'm back home in Cebu, and probably the best way to do it is to share with you my heart, my experience in life, because unbeknownst maybe to many of you, it has been 50 years since I came back to the Philippines. It has been 54 years since I left Cebu to explore a bigger world, a wider world. And I was given the privilege of coming back 50 years ago to share with you the spirit that Saint Josemaria in fact shared with the rest of the world and transmitted so faithfully by the soon-to-be blessed Bishop Alvaro del Portillo. You might begin to ask, okay, so you've been back 50 years. What have you done? What have you learned? What can you share, especially with a crowd of Cebuanos who are interested in doing something about poverty? 50 years is a long time. I'm afraid I'm the oldest person in the room. So I can confidently speak to you about the change that has occurred in this country within these past 50 years. Let me just mention three. Don't forget that I am an economist by training, and therefore I tend to look at life from the economic perspective. 1964, when I came back as an economist with training from a good institution in the United States, what did I find? An economy that was essentially based on 5 crops or natural resources: rice, sugar, coconut, copper, and timber. The political fortunes of presidents of the Philippines depended on whether there was going to be enough rice for everybody and whether the price of rice would stay stable or would increase dramatically. If it would increase, they would be booted out of office. You did not have to create an EDSA revolution to get presidents out. Simply increase the price of rice, and that's the end of the president. If you want the president to be popular, keep the price of rice low. It was how simple it was. But mind you, rice, coconut, sugar, copper, timber, natural resources. We're dependent on the weather. We're dependent on the relationship that we have with the United States with respect to sugar and access to the US market for our coconut oil. And our copper went mainly to the United States. Timber too was shared between the United States and Japan, to some extent Europe. That was the economy. Where are we today? And I guess that's the reason why we are here. We're no longer dependent on natural resource products. Not on rice, not on sugar, not on coconut, not on timber, not on copper. We're dependent on our skills. We're dependent on our human resources. We are dependent on Filipino men and women with some training, with some skills, with some courage, with some heroism, with a professional spirit of service, would be able to compete against everybody else in the world. I'm not quite sure whether you know that if we brought home all of the Filipino nurses and doctors from the Middle East, the entire health system of Saudi Arabia would collapse. I should know this because during the first Iraq War, 1990, I was Secretary of Finance. We had a discussion in the cabinet whether we were going to bring in back our doctors and nurses. And it so leaked out to the press. I had in my office the following day was the ambassador of Saudi Arabia. And his message was very simple. Mr. Secretary, you cannot bring home your nurses and your doctors because our hospital system would collapse without them. Filipinos, foundation of the health system as well. More than 40%, perhaps higher, of the maritime trade by shipping today is made possible because of Filipino hands. We dominate that industry. And of course, we have millions of Filipinos who have gone elsewhere in search of a better life because of their skills. What I can tell you is that the Philippine economy today is no longer the Philippine economy that I came back to. It is no longer dependent on the weather, the natural resources that we have. It is dependent on us, the training, the skills, the attitudes, the aptitudes, the motivation, the formation that we have. That's the economy. What about our polity? Our polity was very much a young nation in transition from 1946-64. Less than 20 years of independence. We're very much in the shadow of the United States. Much of the discussion that we had was the United States, the United States, the United States. By the way, I'm a victim of that. I went to school in the United States. And our society, with democratic form, but on top of a feudal culture. What has happened to us since? Are we still very much in the shadow of the United States? No longer. I must tell you, the most difficult thing that you will have, and the Vice Governor will soon realize this, in having to host an APEC meeting is having to quarrel with the United States. Because they can be so arrogant, so domineering, and so impulsive their views that we Filipinos say, hey, we're not part of you. We have our own views. We have our own political interests. Now, this is different. 2014 is different from 1964. What about our society? Yes, there are still feudal lords, but with social media and all of the conversation that is going on with respect to PDAF and DAP and all of these issues that we have, we're no longer talking about feudalism. We have the rise of the middle income class, in part because of centers like Manila and SITE and other centers that we have here in Cebu. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that there has been change. And I guess the main message that I wanted to convey to you this evening is, if there is one thing I have learned over these past 50 years, it is this: we need to strengthen institutions, whatever they are. And in fact, that is what I've been trying to do in the whole field of economic development. Economic development is not just fixing the banking system. Economic development is not just creating proper fiscal balances so that the national government will have plenty of money. It means all of that. But essentially, economic development is progress, improvement, development of people, for people, and by people. These three have to go together. By people, you've got to get them some education. You've got to give them some motivation so that they will know how to work, they will know how to produce, they will know how to add value. That is by people. And when you talk about poverty, it means that development has to be for everyone. For people. It's not just for the rich, for the privileged. It is not just for Janet Napoles to be able to pocket all of that money in her bank account and so on. That's not development. That is theft. That is plunder. Real development is that we create opportunities for the welfare of everyone. And that is what Manila is. That is what SITE is. That is what we're here for tonight. And don't ever forget that development is, in the final analysis, of people. The poise, the charm, the confidence, the ability to be able to serve as many people as possible. Because we have that personal dignity to be able to serve as many men and women who come our way. So if development means strengthening institutions, and development means development of people, by people, and for people, the question to us is, what are the institutions that we must strengthen for the development of our people? And here, let me give you a lesson that I've learned from a Spanish philosopher who just died about 4 or 5 years ago. One of the great intellectual minds. It's very difficult to read him, in part because he wrote only in Spanish. But even if you read Spanish, it's impossible to understand him because his thoughts were very complicated. But since we're in Cebu, maybe I can give you a simplified version of what he said. And he said there are 3 basic institutions in society that you really have to strengthen if you want that society to develop. First, strengthen the family. Second, strengthen the school and the training institutions. Third, strengthen the enterprises or jobs. These are the enterprises that we want to strengthen. And what are you doing in Manila? What are you doing inside? What are we trying to do because of the inspiration of Bishop Alvaro Portillo? It is really this: to strengthen families, to strengthen schools and the training institutions that we must have, and then to strengthen the small and medium enterprises. Not just the malls that you have too much of in Cebu, but the enterprises that in fact produce the products that will be sold, not just in Cebu, not just in the Visayas, but by the way, 2015, we become part of ASEAN. And instead of thinking only of Cebu, or thinking about 100 million Filipinos, we should be thinking about 600 million ASEAN individuals will be very much part of the Philippine economy. They will compete against us, we'll compete against them. And the real test is whether in fact we will have enterprises that will be competitive. I do not want to in fact say many more things. I simply wanted to conclude by saying, okay, what is it that we should do? Strengthen families, strengthen schools, and strengthen enterprises. We better make sure that in fact all of these institutions that we strengthen, whether family, school, or enterprises, would have three of the governance characteristics that will address the three scourges of any society. First is poverty, second is corruption, and the third one is ignorance. Those are the three evils mentioned by Saint Josemaria. And in fact, these are the evils that we will have to fight outside of the biggest evil of all, with Archbishop Palma leading the charge of the fight, and that is our tendency to sin. But from the economic development standpoint, these are the three scourges that we'll have to fight: poverty, corruption, and ignorance. They're all very related to one another. In fact, poverty is the consequence of corruption. And corruption and poverty are consequences of ignorance. So what we need to do is to banish the darkness of ignorance and bring in the light of Manila. Let me close by simply saying two things. The first is the imagery given by Saint Josemaria. Throw a stone into the middle of the lake. First it creates a small ripple, and then the ripples become bigger and bigger until the entire lake is Center for Professional Development. And I'm addressing the Vice Governor of Cebu. Shouldn't Cebu be the leader, not only of Christianization in the Philippines, but of total, genuine people development in the Philippines? The challenge to all of you in Cebu is, don't make Manila simply as an enclave. Make Manila as a template. A template to be replicated, a template to be multiplied, a template to be scaled up. And you don't have to depend on the ladies that go into the means of formation in centers of Opus Dei. Get that inspiration. But what we need to do is to get a Manila in every town of Cebu. And if we do that, in fact, we'll be addressing the problem of ignorance and the lack of skills, we'll be helping to address the problem of corruption, and we'll be helping to address the problem of poverty. My last imagery is the beautiful imagery that you have of the Sampaguita. The Sampaguita, one flower, one petal, all by itself, cannot be all that fragrant. But string them all together, and you will have a beautiful, fragrant lake that can bring joy, bring happiness to everybody. Manila is just one small Sampaguita flower. What we need to do is to have many more, string them together, give fragrance, give development, give genuine progress, solve poverty, get to the roots of poverty, and have the future directions of living the spirit that is behind Manila. Thank you and good evening.